Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter Stories. I just want to take a moment to tell you how much I love you. You are not just my audience. You are my family, my heart, my biggest blessing. Every story I create, every word I speak is filled with love just for you. A beautiful Sunday prayer for my family. Heavenly Father, I come before you with a heart full of gratitude for my beautiful family. Bless them abundantly. Shower them with peace, love, and happiness. Protect them, Lord, from every worry, every pain, and every struggle. Let their homes be filled with laughter, their hearts with joy, and their lives with endless love. Keep them safe and guide them toward all the goodness you have in store for them. Amen. And my beautiful family, are you enjoying my stories? Am I satisfying your hearts the way you deserve? Let me know in the comments. Your love means everything to me. And remember, we are on a mission. 20,000 subscribers. I believe in you, and I know you will never disappoint me. So, my family, just take 5 seconds, like the video, share it, and subscribe. And please, don't leave the video in the middle. Watch till the end. Now tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments for our online attendance. Let's start with love, joy, and happiness. Chapter 1. The Call That Changed Everything. Sabine Solana felt her entire world shatter in an instant. The phone nearly slipped from her trembling fingers as the voice on the other end sent ice through her veins. Sabine, it's me, her husband. The man she had mourned, the man she had buried, the man who for 3 years had been nothing but a memory. Lucas Maverick sat up, his sharp blue eyes darkening with confusion. Sabine, who is it? She couldn't answer. Her breath came in short, ragged gasps. Sabine, the voice on the phone whispered, I'm alive. The room spun. She felt Lucas's strong hands on her shoulders, steadying her, grounding her, but she couldn't think, couldn't process. This couldn't be real. And yet, the voice. It was him. Lucas gently took the phone from her shaking fingers and placed it on speaker. Who the hell is this? His voice was sharp, laced with controlled fury. A pause, then, I'm Dominic, Sabine's husband. Lucas's jaw clenched. That's impossible. Her husband is dead. A slow exhale. I know how this sounds, the voice replied, but I need to see her. Now. Sabine felt her pulse hammer against her ribs. This wasn't happening. This wasn't real. But the voice, God, the voice, was pulling her back to a past she thought she had buried. Lucas pulled her closer, his grip protective. No, you don't get to do this. You don't get to disappear for 3 years and come back now. Dominic's voice was heavy with something unreadable. Sabine, I was taken. Taken? Sabine gasped, her wide eyes locking onto Lucas's. What do you mean? Taken, she whispered. Dominic sighed, his voice laced with pain. It wasn't an accident. Sabine, I was never supposed to survive that crash. Sabine's chest tightened. The car crash, the one that had killed him, the one that had destroyed her life. I was pulled from the wreckage. I woke up in a place I didn't recognize, held against my will. A deep breath. I fought to get back to you. And now, I finally have. The world felt too small. The air too thin. Lucas's grip on her waist tightened. And what? You expect her to just run back into your arms? His voice was deadly quiet. After 3 years? Another silence. Then, I expect the truth, Dominic said. Does she still love me? Sabine sucked in a sharp breath. Lucas's body tensed. His heartbeat was a steady, powerful drum against her back. Then Dominic spoke again, or has she already moved on? The words cut through her like a knife. She turned, looking up at Lucas, at the man who had broken through her walls, who had made her feel again, who had loved her with a depth that terrified her. Her past was calling, but her present was holding her. Lucas cupped her face, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheek. "I love you," he whispered, "and I'm not letting you go. Not now, not ever." Tears slipped down her face. "Dominic," she whispered into the phone. But the line went dead. A storm raged outside, wind howling through the city. Lucas pulled her into his arms, his body warm, solid, real. The past had returned, but did she still belong to it? Or was her future standing right in front of her? A choice had to be made. One love had been stolen from her, the other had fought to find her, and as Lucas tilted her chin up, pressing a desperate, soul-consuming kiss against her lips, Sabine knew. She wasn't the woman she was 3 years ago. She had mourned, she had survived, and now she had lived. She tangled her fingers in Lucas's hair, deepening the kiss, choosing him. The past would always be a part of her, but the man holding her now, he was her future. Outside, a figure stood in the rain, watching the penthouse windows. Dominic Solana pulled his collar higher against the storm, his eyes never leaving the silhouettes of the embracing couple. "I'm coming home, Sabine," he whispered into the darkness, "whether you're ready or not." Chapter 2. A Past Buried 3. Years earlier, Sabine had stood at the edge of a cliff overlooking the Pacific, scattering what she believed were her husband's ashes into the churning waves below. The funeral had been small, just Sabine and Dominic's business partner, Sebastian Vale. There had been no body, just the charred remains of Dominic's car at the bottom of a ravine and a dental record match that left little room for doubt. "He's gone," Sebastian had told her, his hand firm on her shoulder. "I'm sorry, Sabine." She had caught something in his eyes then, something that in retrospect hadn't quite matched his sympathetic tone. A calculation, perhaps, a watchfulness that seemed out of place at a funeral. But grief had clouded her judgment, and the moment passed unexamined. She had collapsed into grief, a widow at 28. The life she'd built with Dominic, quiet, comfortable, safe, had vanished overnight. For months, she barely left their modest home on the outskirts of San Francisco. The insurance money sat untouched, the sympathy casseroles piled up uneaten, the phone calls went unanswered. Until the day Lucas Maverick knocked on her door. "Mrs. Solana," he'd said, impossibly tall and devastatingly handsome in an expensive suit that seemed out of place in her neglected front yard. "I'm Lucas Maverick. I need to speak with you about your husband's work." Sabine had almost closed the door in his face. "I don't know anything about Dominic's work." "I think you do," Lucas had replied, his blue eyes steady on hers. "And I think he'd want you to hear what I have to say." Something in his voice, conviction, perhaps, or a quiet command that came from a lifetime of being obeyed, had made her step aside. That first conversation had been stilted, painful. Lucas explaining that Dominic had been consulting on a revolutionary clean energy project for Maverick Industries, that his death had halted progress, that Lucas needed Sabine's permission to access Dominic's research notes. "Why should I help you?" she'd asked, arms crossed over her chest. Lucas had studied her for a long moment. "Because your husband believed in this project, because it could help millions of people, because—" He'd paused, choosing his words carefully. "I think you need a reason to get out of bed in the morning, and this could be it." His brutal honesty had startled a laugh from her, the first in months. And somehow, despite her grief, despite her suspicion, she'd found herself saying yes. What had begun as weekly meetings to discuss Dominic's research had slowly evolved into something more. Coffee at her kitchen table became dinner at quiet restaurants. Professional discussions gave way to personal revelations. Lucas's formal politeness softened into genuine care. 6 months after they met, he'd kissed her for the first time, tentatively, as though she might break. She'd pulled back, guilt flooding her system. "I can't," she'd whispered. "I know," Lucas had replied, his thumb brushing her cheek. "But when you can, I'll be here." And he had been. Patient, steadfast, never pushing, but never retreating. A constant presence as she slowly, painstakingly rebuilt her life. On the anniversary of Dominic's death, Lucas had found her on the floor of her closet, surrounded by her husband's clothes that still faintly smelled of him, sobbing as though her heart would break all over again. Without a word, he'd sat down beside her, pulled her into his arms, and held her until the storm passed. "Tell me about him," Lucas had said quietly. And she had. For hours, she'd talked about Dominic. His laugh, his dreams, the way he always burned toast no matter how carefully he watched it. Lucas had listened, really listened, never showing jealousy or impatience. When she finally fell silent, exhausted, he'd pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Thank you for sharing him with me," he'd said. That night, for the first time, she'd let him stay. It had taken another 6 months before she could say, "I love you," back to him, before she could pack away Dominic's things without feeling like she was betraying a sacred trust, before she could wake up beside Lucas without that first, disorienting moment of guilt. They'd been together for almost 2 years now. Lucas had asked her to move into his penthouse 3 months ago, and she'd finally said yes. They'd been discussing marriage, children, a future that once seemed impossible. And now? Now Dominic was back. Like a ghost made flesh, a prayer answered, too late. Sabine stood at the window of Lucas's penthouse, watching lightning split the sky. Behind her, Lucas was on the phone, his voice low and urgent as he ordered increased security, background checks, surveillance. "Lucas," she said quietly, interrupting his call. "What if it's really him?" He paused, then murmured something to the person on the other end and hung up. "Then we'll deal with it," he said, crossing the room to stand behind her. Together. Sabine leaned back against his chest, letting his strength flow into her. "How? He's my husband, Lucas. Legally, at least." Lucas's arms tightened around her waist. "Legally, he was declared dead. There are protocols for this situation." "This situation?" Sabine repeated with a hollow laugh. "Is that what we're calling it now? My dead husband returning from the grave?" Lucas turned her to face him, his expression solemn. "Sabine, I need you to consider something." "What? What if it's not really him?" The question hit her like a physical blow. "I know his voice, Lucas. Voices can be imitated. Technology exists. Why would someone do that?" Lucas's jaw tightened. "I have enemies, people who would love to find a weakness to exploit. And you," his voice softened, "you are my weakness." Sabine's heart twisted. "So what do? We meet him, together, in a public place, and we find out exactly what he wants." She nodded slowly, trying to ignore the voice in the back of her mind, whispering that what Dominic wanted was obvious. He wanted her back, and a part of her, a small buried part she'd thought long dead, wondered if he still had a claim to her heart. Chapter 3. Secrets Unraveled. The night stretched endlessly before Sabine, sleep an elusive ghost that danced just beyond her grasp. Beside her, Lucas slept fitfully, his normally peaceful features twisted with tension, even in repose. She studied the sharp line of his jaw, the dark sweep of his lashes against his cheeks, and felt a surge of love so powerful it nearly took her breath away. How had they come to this? How had her carefully reconstructed life been shattered in the space of a single phone call? Slipping from the bed, Sabine padded barefoot to the kitchen. The penthouse was silent, save for the distant hum of the city below, a constant urban lullaby. That had become the soundtrack to her new life with Lucas. As she waited for the kettle to boil, her mind circled back to Dominic's voice. There had been something different about it, a roughness that hadn't been there before, an edge of desperation, but underneath it was unmistakably him. The Dominic she had loved since college, the Dominic who had held her through her father's death, who had danced with her in the rain on their wedding day, who had promised her forever and then vanished into ashes. The kettle whistled, jolting her from her reverie. As she poured hot water over a tea bag, her phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. "The flash drive in your jewelry box. Password, Grace Baker, Tun 12. I need you to look at it. Now." Sabine's heart stuttered. Grace Baker, 10-12. The name and address number of the restaurant where Dominic had proposed to her on October 12th. A detail so intimate, so specific to their relationship, that it couldn't be faked. With trembling hands, she navigated to Lucas's home office, where her jewelry box sat on a side table. She'd brought it when she moved in, unable to part with the few precious pieces Dominic had given her over the years. The flash drive was there, tucked into a hidden compartment she'd almost forgotten existed. She inserted it into Lucas's computer, entered the password, and held her breath. A video file opened. Dominic's face filled the screen, looking exactly as she remembered him. No premature silver in his hair, no new lines around his eyes. This was Dominic from before. "Sabine," he said, looking directly into the camera, "if you're watching this, something has happened to me. I've been investigating Maverick Industries for months now. They're not what they seem." Sabine's blood turned to ice in her veins. "They're developing something called Project Phoenix. I don't know exactly what it is, but it's not legal, and it's definitely not ethical." Dominic ran a hand over his tired face. "I've compiled evidence, financial records, emails, test results. It's all here, encrypted." Dominic leaned closer. To the camera, his expression grave. "Be careful who you trust, especially Sebastian. He's involved somehow, though I can't prove it yet. And if anything happens to me, look at Maverick, look at Gerald Maverick, and his son, Lucas." The video ended, leaving Sabine staring at a blank screen, her reflection ghostly and pale. "Sabine?" She whirled around to find Lucas standing in the doorway, hair tousled from sleep, eyes sharp with concern. "What are you doing?" For a horrible moment, Sabine couldn't speak, couldn't move. The man she loved watched her with growing suspicion, and all she could think about was the warning from the man she had once loved. "Be careful who you trust." "Dominic sent me a text," she said finally, her voice barely audible, "about a flash drive he left for me before the accident." Lucas crossed the room slowly, as if approaching a frightened animal. "And what's on it?" Sabine hesitated, then turned the screen toward him. "Play it again. I need you to see it." She watched Lucas's face as Dominic's message played, saw the color drain from his features, saw the muscle in his jaw tick with tension. When it ended, Lucas sank into a chair, his eyes never leaving hers. "You think I knew about this?" "It wasn't a question." "I don't know what to think," Sabine admitted. "Did you know what your father was doing?" Lucas pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes. "My father was involved in dozens of projects. Some I knew about, some I didn't. After he died, I discovered irregularities, financial discrepancies, resources being diverted to unlisted facilities." "Project Phoenix?" He nodded grimly. "Among others, I shut them down, all of them, without knowing exactly what they were, because my father's records were deliberately obscured." He looked up at her, his blue eyes pleading. "Sabine, you have to believe me. If Dominic was investigating my father, if he was targeted because of it, I had no knowledge of it, no part in it." Sabine wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and she couldn't simply will it. Away. There's more on the drive, she said, clicking on another folder. Financial records, like he said. Emails. She opened one, scanning its contents. This is correspondence between your father and Sebastian Vale, Dominic's business partner. Lucas moved to read over her shoulder, his breath warm against her neck. They were discussing test subjects, he murmured, his voice tight. Volunteer patients with terminal illnesses. Volunteers? Sabine questioned, scrolling through more emails. Listen to this. The latest acquisition is proving more resilient than expected. Vale assures me his personal connection to the subject will not interfere with the protocol. That doesn't sound like volunteers to me, Lucas. Lucas's face had gone ashen. When is that email dated? March 17th, 3 years ago. Sabine felt a chill run down her spine. 1 week before Dominic's accident. They looked at each other, the implication hanging heavy between them. If what you're saying is true, Lucas said slowly, if my father and Sebastian Vale were involved in something illegal, something that targeted Dominic, then Dominic might really have been taken, Sabine finished, and held somewhere, experimented on. The reality of it crashed over her like a wave. Dominic, her Dominic, alive all this time, suffering, while she grieved, while she moved on, while she fell in love with the son of the man who might have orchestrated his disappearance. I need to see him, she said suddenly, standing up. I need to hear the whole story. From him. Lucas caught her arm. Not alone. Lucas. Not alone. His grip tightened. If even half of what's on that drive is true, then this is bigger and more dangerous than either of us realized. We stay together. We figure this out together. Sabine stared at him, trying to read the truth in his eyes. Was this protectiveness born of love, or a desire to control the narrative? All right, she agreed finally. Together. But as she sent a text to the unknown number, Dominic's number, arranging a meeting for the next day, Sabine couldn't help but wonder if together was still an option, or if the foundations of her new life were about to crumble completely. Chapter 4. The Evidence. Baker Beach stretched before them, golden sand meeting the vast blue of the Pacific. On a normal day, Sabine might have found it beautiful. Today, with her heart in her throat and Lucas's hand tight around hers, she barely noticed the view. They'd arrived early, positioning themselves on a bench with clear sightlines in all directions. Lucas had insisted on security, discreet men and women stationed at intervals along the beach, easily mistaken for joggers or tourists. "You think he might try to hurt me?" Sabine had asked, incredulous. "I think we don't know what 3 years of captivity might have done to him," Lucas had replied, his expression grim. "I think we don't know if he's being followed or watched or used as bait." Now, as they waited, Sabine scanned the beach for any sign of Dominic. Her mind kept returning to the evidence they'd discovered on the flash drive, the emails, the financial records, the video. It all pointed to a conspiracy so enormous, so horrifying, that she still struggled to fully comprehend it. "There," Lucas said suddenly, nodding toward a figure approaching from the north end of the beach. Sabine's breath caught. Even at a distance, she recognized Dominic's walk, that slight hitch in his stride from an old soccer injury. As he drew closer, she noted the changes, the silver threading through his once dark hair, the new lines etched around his eyes and mouth, the thinness of his frame beneath clothes that hung loosely on him. But his eyes, those warm hazel eyes that had once looked at her with such love, were exactly as she remembered. "Sabine," he said, stopping a few feet away, his gaze flicking briefly to Lucas before returning to her. "You came." "Of course I came," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "I had to know." Dominic nodded, then glanced around. "Is this really necessary?" he asked, gesturing vaguely to the security personnel trying to blend into the background. Yes, Lucas said firmly. If what you're claiming is true, then we all need protection. A mirthless smile twisted Dominic's lips. Still playing the hero, Maverick. Even when your father was the villain of this story. Lucas stiffened beside Sabine. My father made many mistakes. If what you're saying is one of them, I want to know the truth as much as you do. Dominic studied him for a long moment, then sighed. Let's walk, he suggested. I've had enough. Of being confined, they fell into step along the shoreline, an awkward trio. Sabine found herself hyper-aware of both men, Lucas's protective presence on her left, Dominic's familiar gait on her right, the past and present colliding in a way she never could have imagined. I saw the flash drive, she said finally, breaking the strained silence. Your message, the emails. Dominic nodded. Then you know I was investigating Maverick Industries, specifically a project called Phoenix. What exactly is Phoenix? Lucas asked. The records I found after my father's death were incomplete at best, deliberately obscured at worst. Dominic's expression shifted from skepticism to grave concern. It's a human trials program. Officially meant to test rapid healing techniques on terminal patients. Unofficially, he stopped walking, turning to face them both. It's about pushing the limits of human endurance. How much trauma can a body withstand? How quickly can it be repaired? How far can you go before death is inevitable? Sabine felt sick. And they did this to you? It is true, Dominic interrupted. He pulled up his sleeve, revealing a forearm crisscrossed with surgical scars. These aren't random injuries, they're methodical, documented experiments. He rolled up his other sleeve, showing identical pattern marks on both arms. Symmetrical testing, same bones broken, different healing protocols. He pulled down his collar, revealing a circular burn mark at the base of his throat, surrounded by precise measured scarring. Electric stimulation of neural pathways, calibrated voltage increases, documented neural responses. They weren't just hurting me, they were writing a scientific roadmap using my body. Sabine covered her mouth, horror washing over her. Oh my God, Lucas looked shaken. If this is true, Dominic spat. I lived it for 3 years. I have the scars to prove it. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object, a titanium pin about 2 inches long. They put this in my leg after it was crushed in the crash. Look at the marking. He handed it to Sabine. Engraved along one side was a tiny phoenix rising from flames. Beneath it, the letters GM. Gerald Maverick, Dominic said. Your father-in-law's handiwork. Lucas stared at the pin, his face pale. This doesn't mean my father knew about the human trials. It doesn't mean he sanctioned your abduction. Doesn't it? Dominic challenged. The emails say otherwise. Emails can be forged, Lucas countered, just like dental records. Dominic's expression hardened. You think I'm lying? That I did this to myself? He gestured to his scarred body. That I voluntarily disappeared for 3 years, letting my wife think I was dead. I think there are too many questions, Lucas replied evenly. Too many convenient explanations that cast my father as a monster and you as an innocent victim. The 2 men stared at each other, tension crackling between them like electricity before a storm. Stop it, Sabine said suddenly, unable to bear it any more. Both of you. This isn't helping. She turned to Dominic. If what you're saying is true, how did you escape? Where were you being held? Dominic's eyes softened as he looked at her. I was in a facility in northern Costa Rica, underground, remote. For years, I had no opportunity to escape. They kept me sedated between tests, restrained when I was conscious. What changed? Lucas asked, skepticism still evident in his tone. Funding dried up, Dominic said simply. About 6 months ago. Suddenly there were fewer guards, fewer doctors. Equipment started disappearing. I realized the project was being shut down. Lucas frowned. 6 months ago, I completed a full audit of all my father's legacy projects. I cut funding to anything that couldn't demonstrate ethical research protocols. Dominic's eyebrows rose. So you claim ignorance, but your actions freed me. Interesting. I didn't know. That's becoming your refrain, isn't it? Dominic interrupted. You didn't know what your father was doing. You didn't know about Project Phoenix. You didn't know about me. His voice dropped. Did you know about Sabine? Did you know who she was when you sought her out? Lucas's eyes flashed. Of course I knew who she was. I came to her about your research, remember? How convenient, Dominic murmured. The grieving widow, all alone, vulnerable, perfect target for the charming billionaire. That's not how it was, Sabine protested, but Dominic continued, as if she hadn't spoken. Did you know I wasn't dead when you started sleeping with my wife? He demanded, taking a step toward Lucas. Did you know I was screaming her name while your father's doctors cut into me? Lucas's control snapped. He surged forward, grabbing Dominic by the front of his shirt. You don't get to speak to her like that. You don't get to come back from the dead and act like the last 3 years didn't happen, like she didn't suffer, like she didn't have the right to rebuild her life. Dominic didn't flinch. I'm still her husband, and I'm the man she loves now, Lucas growled. Stop it, Sabine pushed between them, forcing them apart. This isn't about either of you. This is about finding the truth. She turned to Dominic. I need proof, real irrefutable proof that Gerald Maverick and Sebastian Vale orchestrated your disappearance, that they were running this torture program. Dominic held her gaze. I have proof. I downloaded files before I escaped. Locations, names, of other subjects. Test protocols, everything. He hesitated. But I won't share it with him. He nodded toward Lucas. I don't trust him. Then trust me, Sabine said urgently. Show me. But Dominic was already shaking his head. It's not safe, not yet. I need to be sure that you're not compromised. Compromised? Sabine repeated incredulously. I'm your wife. Pain flickered across Dominic's features. Are you? Still? His gaze moved to Lucas, then back to her. 3 years is a long time, Sabine. People change. Loyalties shift. The accusation stung, but Sabine forced herself to remain calm. What do you want, Dominic? What's your endgame here? For the first time, uncertainty crossed his face. I want justice. I want the people responsible to pay for what they did to me, to others. He paused. And I want to know if there's anything left of us, of what we had. The raw honesty in his voice cut through Sabine's defenses. This was Dominic, her first love, the man she had promised forever to. He had been through hell, and he had fought his way back to her. But when she glanced at Lucas, saw the fear and love warring in his eyes, she knew that nothing would ever be simple again. I need time, she said finally. It's too much, too fast. Dominic nodded slowly. I understand. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a burner phone. When you're ready to see the rest of the evidence, call this number. But Sabine, his voice dropped. Don't. Wait too long. There are people who would kill to keep this buried. He pressed the phone into her hand, his fingers lingering against hers for a moment too long. Then, with a last guarded look at Lucas, he turned and walked away, his silhouette gradually disappearing into the foggy coastline. Sabine stared after him, the phone heavy in her palm, her heart heavier still in her chest. Do you believe him? Lucas asked quietly. Sabine closed her eyes, overwhelmed by the impossibility of her situation. I don't know, she admitted. But those scars were real, Lucas. That pin was real. There could be other explanations. Like what? She challenged. turning to face him. What possible explanation could there be for him disappearing for 3 years, only to return with surgical scars and insider knowledge of your father's company? Lucas had no answer. As they made their way back to the car, Sabine felt torn in two, half of her heart with the man whose hand she held, half with the ghost who had just walked away. Both claimed to love her, both might be lying to her, and she had no idea where the truth actually lay. Chapter 5. Face to Face. The safe house was Lucas's idea, a secluded property in Sonoma wine country, far from prying eyes and potential threats. Sabine had protested, at first, insisting they needed to stay in the city, to follow the leads on the flash drive, to find Sebastian Vale. Vale has already disappeared, Lucas had countered, showing her the preliminary report from his security team. His apartment's been cleared out, his accounts emptied. He's in the wind, Sabine. Then we need to find him. We will, Lucas had promised. But first, we need to regroup, think, decide our next move without the pressure of being watched. So, here they were, surrounded by rolling vineyards and late summer sunlight, in a house with state-of-the-art security and no digital footprint. Lucas had brought in a tech specialist to analyze the flash drive's contents more thoroughly, searching for any clue to Sebastian's whereabouts or the location of the Costa Rican facility Dominic had mentioned. Sabine stood on the deck, watching. The sun dipped toward the horizon, turning the sky into a canvas of pink and gold. Under different circumstances, it would have been paradise. Her and Lucas, wine country, no interruptions. But paradise was a distant dream now. All she could think about was Dominic's scarred body, the pain in his eyes when he'd asked if she was still his wife, the terrible choice that lay before her. Penny for your thoughts? Lucas stepped onto the deck, 2 glasses of red wine in hand. He offered one to her, a peace offering of sorts, after a tense day of waiting for news. Just a penny? She asked, accepting the glass with a faint smile. Maverick Industries must be in trouble, he chuckled, the sound warming her despite everything. Billion-dollar empires have been built on paying fair market value. They stood side by side, watching the sunset in companionable silence. It was moments like these, quiet, intimate, perfectly aligned, that had made Sabine fall in love with Lucas in the first place. I've been thinking, he said finally, his voice careful, about what happens after this is resolved. Sabine took a long sip of wine. Bold of you to assume it will be resolved. It will, Lucas said with quiet confidence. We'll find Sebastian. We'll get to the bottom of what my father was involved in. We'll make it right, Sabine. She turned to look at him, studying the determined set of his jaw, the unwavering blue of his eyes. And then what? Dominic is still legally my husband, Lucas. Even if everything else gets resolved, that doesn't change. A shadow crossed his face. You could file for divorce. On what grounds? Abandonment, when he was being held against his will. If that's even true, Lucas muttered. Sabine set her wineglass down with more force than necessary. What reason would he have to lie? Revenge, Lucas suggested, against my father's company, against me for taking his place in your life. That's absurd. How would he even know about us? Lucas shrugged. Social media, news coverage. We haven't exactly been hiding our relationship, Sabine. It was true. Their romance had garnered attention in the business press. The billionaire CEO and the beautiful widow, a love story risen from tragedy. It had embarrassed Sabine at first, but Lucas had helped her navigate the spotlight with grace. So you think he saw a photo of us together and decided to fake an elaborate conspiracy involving your father and human experimentation? Sabine shook her head in disbelief. Lucas, listen to yourself. I'm just saying we need to consider all possibilities, Lucas insisted, including the possibility that Dominic isn't being entirely truthful. Sabine sighed, running her hands through her hair. I don't know what to believe anymore. I just know that I can't ignore the evidence. Those scars on his body, the pin with your father's initials. She looked up at Lucas, her eyes searching his face. If there's anything you're not telling me, now is the time, because once we follow this trail, there's no turning back. Lucas's expression softened. He took her face between his hands, his touch gentle but firm. I have never lied to you, Sabine, not once. I didn't know what my father was doing, but if he hurt Dominic, if he was involved in any of this, I will make it right, I promise you. That! The conviction in his voice steadied her. This was the Lucas she knew, honorable, determined, unflinching in the face of difficult truths. Okay, she whispered, I trust you. But as night fell and they retreated to the bedroom, Sabine found herself staring at the ceiling, sleep eluding her. Her mind kept replaying Dominic's words, his scars, the raw pain in his eyes when he looked at her. The past she thought she had buried had risen to haunt her, and she wasn't sure if any of them would emerge from this unscathed. Chapter 6. Hearts Divided. The burner phone Dominic had given her buzzed at 3 a.m., jolting Sabine from a fitful sleep. Lucas stirred beside her but didn't wake as she slipped from the bed and into the adjoining bathroom, closing the door quietly before answering. Sabine. Dominic's voice was tense, urgent. They found me. I had to move. I don't have much time. Her heart raced. Who found you? Sebastian's men. They came to my motel last night. His breathing was labored as if he'd been running. I need to see you. Alone. No security, no Maverick. Sabine hesitated, torn between caution and the pull of their shared history. Where? The old boathouse at China Beach. 1 hour. Come alone, or don't come at all. The line went dead before she could respond. Sabine stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, at the woman caught between two men, two lives, two versions of the truth. She barely recognized herself anymore. She showered quickly and dressed in jeans and a sweater. Lucas was still asleep when she emerged, his face peaceful in repose, vulnerable in a way he rarely allowed himself to be when awake. She scribbled a note about needing air and going for a drive, then slipped out before she could change her mind. The drive to China Beach took less time than it should have, her foot heavy on the accelerator as dawn broke over the city. By the time she arrived, the sun was fully up, glinting off the water of the bay. The boathouse was exactly as she remembered it, weathered grey wood, peeling blue trim, the place where she and Dominic had sought shelter during a sudden rainstorm on their third date. He'd kissed her for the first time there, rain drumming on the roof, the scent of salt water and wet wood surrounding them. Now it looked abandoned, the door hanging slightly ajar. Sabine approached cautiously, every sense on high alert. "Dominic!" she called softly, pushing the door open wider. He was sitting on an overturned crate, his face partially obscured by shadows. When he looked up, Sabine gasped. A fresh cut sliced across his cheekbone, already purpling with bruising. What happened? She crossed to him quickly, her hand instinctively reaching out to touch his face. He caught her wrist, his grip gentle but firm. "Sebastian's men. They came to my motel last night. How did they find you?" Dominic's mouth twisted. "I have my suspicions." Sabine withdrew her hand. "You think Lucas told them?" "I think Lucas Maverick has as much to lose as his father did if the truth about Phoenix comes to light." Anger flared in Sabine's chest. "Lucas has been nothing but untransparent with me. He's helping investigate his own father's company. Is he?" Dominic challenged. "Or is he controlling the investigation? Making sure you only see what he wants you to see?" The doubt that had been festering in Sabine's mind bloomed anew. Lucas had insisted on using his own security team, his own tech specialists. Was that protection or manipulation? "Why did you ask me here, Dominic?" He sighed, suddenly looking exhausted. "Two reasons. First, to give you this." He handed her a USB drive, smaller than the one she'd found in her jewelry box. It contains more specific evidence about Project Phoenix, locations, names of other test subjects, doctors who participated, everything I couldn't risk leaving at our house in case something happened to me. Sabine took it, her fingers brushing his. And the second reason? Dominic's eyes, those familiar hazel eyes that had once held her entire world, met hers. To ask you if there's anything left for us to salvage. The question hung between them, heavy with unspoken history and pain. I don't know, Sabine admitted, her voice barely audible. 3 years is a long time, Dominic. Do you love him? The question was direct, unflinching. Sabine didn't hesitate. Yes. A flash of pain crossed Dominic's features. More than you loved me? Differently, she corrected gently. It's not a comparison, Dominic. What we had, it was everything to me. You were my first love, my husband, my future. Losing you destroyed me. But Lucas put you back together. She nodded slowly. He did. Not right away. Not easily. But yes, eventually. Dominic stood, closing the distance between them. And if I'd never disappeared, if we'd had the life we planned, the question made Sabine's heart ache. What if? The eternal, unanswerable question of every life touched by tragedy. I don't know, she whispered. We can't rewrite the past. No, he agreed, his voice rough, but we can write the future. Before she could react, he leaned in and kissed her. A kiss filled with longing, with memory, with the ghost of what they had once been to each other. For a heartbeat, Sabine let herself remember, let the familiar taste of him wash over her. Then, gently but firmly, she pulled away. I can't, she said. It's not fair to any of us. Dominic's eyes were bright with unshed tears. I never stopped loving you, Sabine, not for a single day. The words shattered something inside her. I never stopped loving you either, she admitted. I just learned to live with the pain, learned to open my heart again. To Lucas, Dominic said, his voice flat. Yes, to Lucas. He stepped back, his expression closing off. Then I guess I have my answer. Dominic. It's okay, he interrupted, though his tone belied the words. I understand. 3 years is a long time. He gestured to the USB drive in her hand. Just promise me you'll look at what's on there. Regardless of us, the truth deserves to be known. Sabine nodded, slipping the drive into her pocket. I promise. As she turned to leave, Dominic called after her. Sabine, she paused, looking back over her shoulder. Be careful, he said softly. Trust your instincts, not just your heart. The warning followed her all the way back to Lucas's penthouse, where she found him awake and frantic, his security team already mobilized to search for her. Where the hell have you been? He demanded, pulling her into a fierce embrace the moment she walked through the door. I woke up, and you were gone. Just a vague note. I thought... He couldn't finish the sentence. Guilt washed over Sabine. I'm sorry, she murmured against his chest. I needed some space to think, to clear my head. It wasn't entirely a lie, but as Lucas held her, his relief palpable, Sabine couldn't bring herself to tell him about meeting Dominic, about the kiss, about the USB drive now burning a hole in her pocket. For the first time since they'd been together, she was keeping secrets from him, and she wasn't sure what that said about who she really trusted. Chapter 7. Dangerous Revelations. Sabine waited until Lucas was in the shower before slipping the USB drive into her laptop. Her fingers trembled as she navigated through the files. The first document caught her by surprise, an internal memo from Sebastian Vale to Gerald Maverick, dated 4 years ago. Subject acquisition protocols must be refined. The Solana situation provides unique opportunities if handled correctly. His research into our operations makes him both a threat and potential asset. Sabine's blood ran cold. This wasn't random. Dominic had been targeted specifically because of what he knew. This contradicted Lucas's claim that his father wouldn't have known about Dominic. So, she clicked through financial documents next, finding a complex web of shell companies. One name appeared repeatedly as a signatory, L. Maverick, but the signature didn't match Lucas's. It was a forgery, skilled enough to pass casual inspection, but different in subtle ways from Lucas's actual handwriting. Someone has been using Lucas's name, she whispered to herself. But who? Medical records followed, dozens documenting procedures performed on subjects identified only by numbers. Surgical notes detailed broken bones, tissue damage, experimental treatments. Progress reports tracked recovery times, pain, thresholds, tolerance levels. FBI case numbers in the corner of some files revealed something else. Investigations had been opened and mysteriously closed over the years. Sabine found a file labeled Executive Protocol that made her gasp. It outlined a deliberate corporate structure designed to shield certain executives from legal liability. Gerald Maverick remains principal director with full knowledge. Lucas Maverick maintains plausible deniability through compartmentalized information channels. Sebastian Vale serves as operational director with direct oversight of all facilities. Photos followed, clinical, terrible images of injuries, surgeries, scars, methodically catalogued like specimens in a museum. Sabine's stomach lurched when she found a folder labeled Subject 47, Dominic's prison number. The images inside confirmed his story, his body a canvas for medical torture, his recovery tracked with cold scientific precision. But it was the video file that froze the blood in her veins. Gerald Maverick's face filled the screen, unmistakable with his steel grey. Hair and piercing blue eyes so like his son's. Behind him stood Sebastian Vale, watching with clinical detachment. Phoenix Progress Report, Phase 2, Day 87, Gerald stated. The Solana Protocol has exceeded expectations, accelerated healing in the tibial fracture, minimal scarring despite extensive tissue trauma. The camera panned, revealing a medical theater. On the table lay Dominic, unconscious, his chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. A team of masked doctors surrounded him. Subject 47 continues to demonstrate remarkable resilience, Gerald continued. Vale was correct to identify him as an ideal candidate. His proximity to our operations through his research made him both a security risk and our most valuable asset. Sebastian stepped forward. What about your son? He's been asking questions about resource allocation. Gerald waved dismissively. Lucas remains focused on the public-facing projects. He's idealistic, a useful trait for the company's image, but a liability for our more ambitious work. He must be kept unaware of Phoenix's true nature. And if he discovers the truth, Sebastian pressed. Gerald's expression hardened. Then contingencies are in place. The corporate structure shields him from legal responsibility while ensuring he remains financially complicit. Should investigations occur, the paper trail leads to him, not us. Sabine slammed the laptop closed, trembling with rage and nausea. This wasn't just experimentation. It was a calculated conspiracy, with multiple layers of protection. Gerald, Maverick had not only tortured Dominic, but had deliberately set up his own son as a potential fall guy. The shower shut off. Sabine quickly removed the drive and slipped it into her pocket, her mind racing. Lucas wasn't complicit. He was another victim of his father's manipulation, set up to take the blame if anything went wrong. Feeling better? Lucas asked, as he emerged from the bathroom, a towel wrapped around his waist. Sabine forced a smile. A little. He studied her face, his brow furrowing. You're pale. Are you sure you're okay? Just tired, she lied. I didn't sleep well. Lucas crossed to her, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Why don't you rest while I make some calls? Tech team should have preliminary results from the first flash drive soon." Sabine nodded, watching as he dressed and stepped into the adjoining office. The moment he was gone, she retrieved her phone and sent a text to Dominic's burner. "Found new evidence. Your suspicions were right, but not how you think. Gerald set Lucas up as a fall guy while keeping him in the dark. We need to talk, all three of us." His response came almost immediately. "Not safe. Vale is watching. Too dangerous to meet." "I'll make it safe," she replied. "Lucas needs to see what his father did to both of you." There was a long pause before Dominic's next message. "Lighthouse Cafe in Sausalito. 4 p.m. tomorrow. Public enough to deter violence. Come with security." They settled on the details, and Sabine put the phone away, her decision made. Tomorrow, Lucas would see the full truth about his father and Sebastian Vale. Tomorrow, they would begin to unravel the conspiracy that had destroyed so many lives. And tomorrow, she would finally have to choose where her loyalties truly lay. When Lucas emerged from his office an hour later, Sabine was ready. "We need to talk," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Lucas's expression grew wary. "About what?" "About your father. About Project Phoenix." She took a deep breath. "I've seen the evidence, Lucas. All of it." His jaw tightened. "What evidence?" "Videos of your father overseeing experiments on Dominic. Records showing how you were set up as the fall guy if investigations ever got too close." She met his eyes directly. "Your signature was forged on key documents. Your father and Sebastian created a paper trail leading to you while keeping you in the dark." Lucas stared at her, shock and confusion warring on his face. "That's not possible. My father wouldn't." "He did," Sabine cut him off, her voice gentle but firm. "He created Phoenix. He targeted Dominic, and he made sure that if it all came crashing down, you'd be the one to take the blame." Lucas sank into a chair, his face ashen. "Let me see." Sabine handed him the USB drive. "It's all there, including his plan to frame you if necessary." As Lucas reviewed the files, Sabine watched his expression transform from disbelief to horror, to a cold, controlled fury she'd never seen before. "Sebastian Vale," he said finally, his voice dangerously quiet. "He was my father's right hand, the one person I kept on after the transition because he knew all the systems, all the projects." A bitter laugh escaped him. "And all this time, he's been continuing my father's work while setting me up to take the fall. We're meeting with Dominic tomorrow," Sabine told him, "at the Lighthouse Cafe in Sausalito. He's seen some of this evidence, but not all of it. Together, we might be able to figure out how to expose Vale without destroying you in the process." Lucas looked up at her, vulnerability and gratitude warring in his eyes. "You believe me? That I didn't know?" It wasn't a question, but Sabine answered anyway. "I believe in you," she said simply. "I always have." As night fell outside the penthouse windows, Sabine felt the first stirrings of hope amid the chaos. The truth was complex, messy, and painful, but at least now they knew who the real enemy was. And with Lucas and Dominic both on the same side, perhaps there was a way forward after all. Chapter 8. The Hidden Player. The Lighthouse Cafe was quiet in the late afternoon lull. Just a few tourists lingering over late lunches and local fishermen stopping in for coffee. Sabine and Lucas secured a table in the back corner, positioned so they could see both the entrance and the marina through large windows. "Any word from Agent Hayes?" Lucas asked quietly, surprising Sabine. "Agent who?" Lucas's eyes narrowed. "The FBI agent who called you this morning. You said she wanted to meet about Phoenix." Sabine shook her head slowly. "Lucas, no one called me. I haven't spoken to any FBI agents." They stared at each other, realization dawning simultaneously. "It's a trap," Lucas said, already standing. Someone lured us both here. As if on cue, Sabine's phone buzzed with a text from Dominic. Don't go to Lighthouse. Vale knows. Meeting compromised. He's late because he never agreed to this meeting, Sabine realized, showing Lucas the message. Someone used his number to text me last night. Someone with access to his communications. Sebastian, Lucas growled. He's been watching all of us. His phone rang. Michael Torres, his head of security. Lucas answered, putting it on speaker. Sir, we've got a problem, Michael said urgently. Our surveillance picked up Vale entering your old house, Mrs. Solana's former residence. He wasn't alone. Dominic? Sabine asked, her heart racing. Yes, ma'am, being carried, unconscious. Lucas was already heading for the door, Sabine close behind. Call the police, he ordered Michael. Tell them we need backup at the Westwood. Address and alert my private security team. Already done, sir, Michael replied. But there's something else you should know. The FBI has been monitoring Vale for weeks. They've had an open investigation since 3 former Phoenix patients came forward last month. Why weren't we told? Lucas demanded as they reached his car. Agent Hayes was planning to contact you today. Vale must have intercepted their communications. Pieces clicked into place for Sabine. That's how he knew to set this trap. He's been monitoring everything, our calls, our messages, even the FBI. As Lucas sped through traffic toward their old neighborhood, Sabine loaded the gun he kept in. The glove compartment. The modest Tudor-style home looked exactly as she remembered it, though the new owners had painted the trim a different color and added a garden fence. They're not home, Sabine observed, noting the absence of cars in the driveway. But look, the basement light is on. They circled the house, staying out of sight of windows. The basement door was hidden behind overgrown shrubs, just as it had been when Sabine lived there. It's unlocked, Lucas noted with concern as the door swung open at his touch. Sebastian wants us to follow him in. We don't have a choice, Sabine replied grimly. He has Dominic. The basement was dark and musty, illuminated only by thin shafts of light from small ground-level windows. Sabine moved with practiced ease, navigating around stored furniture and boxes. The panic room is behind that bookshelf, she whispered, pointing to a built-in unit against the far wall. Dominic installed it after a break-in 3 doors down. Said it was better to be prepared. Lucas examined it skeptically. How does it open? Sabine reached behind a row of old encyclopedias, feeling for the hidden lever. Like this. With a soft click, the bookshelf swung inward, revealing a small room beyond, and a figure slumped in a chair, head bowed. Dominic! Sabine rushed forward, fear clutching at her heart. He looked up slowly, his face a mask of blood and bruises. One eye was swollen shut, his lips split, dried blood caking his shirt collar. Trap, he rasped, his voice barely audible. Get out. 2. Late, Sabine registered the sound of footsteps behind them. She spun around to see Sebastian Vale step from the shadows, a gun trained on Lucas. How touching, Sebastian drawled. A family reunion. Lucas tensed beside Sabine. Vale. Sebastian smiled, the expression never reaching his cold eyes. Maverick, I was hoping you'd join us. He gestured toward several security monitors mounted on the wall, showing feeds from Lucas's penthouse, Sabine's hotel, even the Lighthouse Cafe they'd just left. I've been keeping a close eye on all of you. What do you want? Sabine demanded, moving protectively toward Dominic. What I've always wanted, Sebastian replied coolly. To complete the work your father-in-law started. Lucas's eyes narrowed. My father is dead. Yes, Sebastian agreed, and yet Project Phoenix lives on, thanks in no small part to your, shall we say, benign neglect. Confusion flickered across Lucas's face. What are you talking about? I shut down Phoenix. Sebastian laughed, a dry, humorless sound. You redirected funds. You removed your name from the paperwork, but shut it down? Hardly. He gestured toward Dominic with his free hand. Your star subject here, for instance, still providing valuable data even after his unfortunate escape. Sabine looked from Sebastian to Lucas, horror dawning. You knew, she whispered. You knew all along. No, Lucas protested, his face pale. Sabine, he's lying. Am I? Sebastian interrupted. Tell me, Lucas, what did you think happened to all those research facilities after your father died? All those doctors on the payroll, all those test subjects. His smile widened. They didn't just disappear because you wished them away. I had no idea, Lucas insisted. The audit was superficial at best, Sebastian finished. A show for the board of directors. Meanwhile, the real work continued, funded through shell companies, conducted in facilities that officially don't exist. Dominic coughed weakly from his chair. He's been running Phoenix all along, Sabine, using Gerald Maverick's research, his methods, and his son's money, Sebastian added with a smirk. Lucas lunged forward, but Sebastian cocked the gun. I wouldn't if I were you. What do you want? Sabine asked again, her mind racing for a way out of this nightmare. Sebastian's expression turned calculating. Information. Specifically, the location of all copies of that troublesome video your husband managed to steal. I can't have Gerald Maverick's face plastered all over the media, can I? Bad for business. It's too late, Sabine bluffed. We've already sent copies to the authorities, to the press. Sebastian's eyes hardened. I don't believe you. Believe this, Dominic said, suddenly straightening in his chair. You'll never get away with this. Too many people know now. Agent Hayes has been building a case for weeks. Sebastian's composure slipped for the first time. Hayes, what do you know about Hayes? The momentary distraction was all Lucas needed. He signaled to Sabine with a slight nod, catching Dominic's eye as well. A silent three-way communication passed between them in that instant, a unified plan formed without words. And then everything happened at once. Chapter 9. Breaking Point. Lucas lunged for Sebastian's gun. Dominic surged from his chair and Sabine dove for the heavy flashlight. On a nearby shelf, the gunshot was deafening in the confined space, the bullet embedding itself in the concrete wall, inches from Lucas's head. Dominic tackled Sebastian at the knees, sending them both crashing to the floor. The gun skittered away, disappearing beneath a stack of storage boxes. Run, Lucas shouted to Sabine, grappling with Sebastian as Dominic struggled to regain his feet. But Sabine wasn't leaving, not without both of them. She gripped the flashlight like a club, scanning for an opening to strike without hitting Lucas or Dominic. Sebastian fought with the desperation of a cornered animal. He drove his elbow into Dominic's already injured ribs, drawing a pained gasp, then twisted free of Lucas's grip long enough to reach inside his jacket. The knife appeared as if by magic, its blade catching the dim light. Sebastian slashed wildly, opening a long gash on Lucas's forearm. Blood bloomed instantly, staining his white shirt crimson. "Lucas!" Sabine cried, stepping forward. Sebastian whirled toward her, knife raised. "Back off, or I'll cut his throat!" Time seemed to slow. Sabine saw the madness in Sebastian's eyes, the blood dripping from Lucas's arm, Dominic struggling to stand, one hand pressed to his ribs. "This ends now," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Sebastian's mouth twisted in a sneer. "You're in no position to make demands. Neither are you," came a new voice from the basement entrance. All eyes turned to see Agent Caroline Hayes at the front of a team of armed FBI agents, weapons trained on Sebastian. "We've been tracking Vale for months," Hayes announced, her aim unwavering. "Ever since whistleblowers from 3 different Maverick research sites contacted us about Project Phoenix. Drop the weapon, now." Sebastian hesitated, calculating his odds. Then, with a fluid motion, he lunged towards Sabine, knife aimed at her heart. Two shots rang out, one from Agent Hayes's gun, another from a revolver that had suddenly appeared in Dominic's hand, pulled from beneath the chair he'd been tied to. Sebastian staggered, his expression one of almost comical surprise as he looked down at the spreading stains on his chest. The knife clattered to the floor, followed by Sebastian himself. "You had a gun?" Lucas gasped, clutching his bleeding arm. "Insurance policy," Dominic grimaced, lowering the weapon. "Kept it hidden in the panic room years ago. Vale never found it during his search." The next few minutes passed in a blur of activity. FBI agents securing the scene, paramedics rushing in, Sabine insisting on riding in the ambulance with both injured men, despite protocols allowing only one family member per vehicle. "They're both my family," she told the paramedic firmly. "I'm not choosing." At the hospital, Agent Hayes cornered Sabine in the waiting room while doctors treated Lucas and Dominic. "Mrs. Solana," Hayes began, her manner professional but sympathetic. "I know this has been traumatic, but I need to ask you some questions." "About Project Phoenix," Sabine asked wearily. "About both of the men you arrived with," Hayes clarified. "Our investigation indicates complex roles for both of them." Sabine straightened. Lucas Maverick had no knowledge of Phoenix's human experimentation. His father deliberately kept him in the dark while creating a paper trail that implicated him. "I have evidence proving this." She pulled out the USB drive. "It's all here. Gerald Maverick explicitly discussing how Lucas was to be kept unaware and set up as a scapegoat if necessary." Hayes took the drive, her expression thoughtful. "This could change the direction of our investigation significantly." "It should," Sabine insisted. "Lucas has been trying to dismantle his father's legacy, not continue it. Sebastian Vale was the one running Phoenix all along, using forged authorizations and shell companies." Hayes nodded slowly. "And your husband? Dominic Solana?" "A victim," Sabine said firmly, "targeted because he discovered Phoenix while researching Maverick Industries. He escaped 6 months ago and has been gathering evidence since then." "Yet he didn't come to us," Hayes noted. "Would you if you'd been tortured for 3 years by people with enough power to fake your death and make the world forget you existed?" Sabine challenged. The agent conceded the point with a slight nod. "We'll need statements from both men once they're stable." "Of course," Sabine agreed, "but you should know, they saved my life today, both of them. Whatever else you learn about either of them, remember that." After Hayes departed, Sabine was left alone with her thoughts in the sterile waiting room. The events of the past week swirled in her mind. Dominic's return, Lucas's struggle with his father's legacy, the horrifying truth of Project Phoenix, and now Sebastian's death. A nurse appeared, breaking her reverie. "Mrs. Solana, your husband is asking for you." Sabine hesitated. "Which one?" The nurse looked confused. "Mr. Solana in room 302. The other gentleman is still in surgery." Dominic was propped up in bed, his face a mosaic of bruises, his ribs heavily bandaged. Despite his injuries, his eyes brightened when she entered. "How's Lucas?" were his first words. The question surprised her. "Still in surgery. The knife damaged tendons in his arm." Dominic nodded, wincing slightly at the movement. "He fought. Well, didn't hesitate when Vale pulled that knife." "Neither did you," Sabine said, taking the chair beside his bed. "You saved my life." "We both did," Dominic corrected quietly. His eyes held hers steadily. "He loves you, you know. Enough to die for you." Something in his tone made Sabine's heart ache. "So do you." A sad smile touched his lips. "Yes, always have." He shifted, grimacing in pain. "But that's not why I'm bringing it up." "Then why?" "Because I've had time to think, lying here." Dominic's voice was soft but certain. "About the past 3 years. About what you've been through. About who you've become." Sabine felt tears, threatening. Dominic! He reached for her hand. You're not the same woman I married, Sabine. You're stronger, more resilient. You've built a new life for yourself. With him. That doesn't erase what we had, she insisted. No, he agreed, but it does change what we could have. He squeezed her hand gently. I saw how you looked at him when he was bleeding on that basement floor. I recognized that look because you used to look at me that way. Tears slipped down Sabine's cheeks. I don't know what to do, she admitted, her voice breaking. I love you both, differently, but truly. I know, Dominic said, his own eyes bright with emotion. And that's why, when this is all over, when the dust settles, you need to make a real choice, not out of guilt or obligation, but out of love. A nurse appeared in the doorway. Mrs. Solana, Mr. Maverick is out of surgery. He's asking for you. Sabine stood, torn between staying with Dominic and going to Lucas. I should go, Dominic said, releasing her hand. We'll talk more later. She hesitated, then leaned down and pressed a gentle kiss to his forehead. Thank you for understanding. His smile was sad but genuine. I had 3 years to learn patience, Sabine. I can wait a little longer for you to find your way. The walk to Lucas's recovery room felt like the longest journey of Sabine's life. Each step weighted with the conversation she'd just had and the one that lay ahead. When she finally pushed open the door, she found him pale but alert, his arm heavily bandaged, an IV dripping fluids into his other hand. Sabine, he breathed, reaching for her. How is he? The question, so similar to Dominic's first words, made her heart twist. Battered but stable. Good, Lucas said with genuine relief. He saved your life, pulled that gun out of nowhere. You both did, Sabine corrected, taking his outstretched hand. You jumped at Sebastian without hesitation, even knowing he was armed. I couldn't let him hurt you, Lucas said simply. His eyes searched hers. Hayes told me you gave her the USB drive. The evidence about my father setting me up. Sabine nodded. They needed to know the truth. Thank you, he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. For believing in me when everyone else would have assumed the worst. I know who you are. Lucas, Sabine said quietly, I've seen your heart. Something vulnerable flickered in his eyes. And Dominic? What happens now? It was the question she'd been dreading, the one she didn't have an answer for. I don't know, she admitted. This isn't a situation with easy answers. Lucas nodded slowly, pain passing across his features that had nothing to do with his physical injuries. I understand, he paused, gathering himself. Just know that whatever you decide, whoever you choose, I'll respect it. Because I love you enough to want your happiness above all else. The echo of Dominic's sentiment, so similar yet from such a different man, made Sabine's heart clench painfully in her chest. 2 men, both willing to let her go if that's what she truly wanted, both putting her happiness above their own. As she left the hospital that night, exhausted and emotionally drained, Sabine felt torn between gratitude for their selflessness and frustration at the impossible choice before her. The past she had mourned had returned in Dominic, steady, patient, familiar. The future she had embraced stood in Lucas, passionate, protective, transformative. Both loved her enough to set her free. Now she had to decide where her heart truly belonged. Chapter 10. The Escape. 3 days passed in a blur of FBI interviews, hospital visits, and sleepless nights. Sabine had checked into a hotel, needing space from both men as she sorted through the wreckage of her life. What she hadn't expected was the media storm. Maverick heir implicated in human experimentation scandal, screamed one headline. Dead husband returns, billionaire boyfriend knew all along, declared another. The press had somehow gotten wind of the story, a sanitized version, missing key details but lurid enough to sell papers. Photographers, camped outside the hospital, outside Lucas's building, even tracked down her hotel. "It's a circus," Agent Hayes commented during their latest meeting in a secure FBI office. "Unfortunately, that's making our investigation more complicated." Sabine rubbed her temples, fighting a mounting headache. "What happens now?" "We're building a case around Sebastian Vale and the late Gerald Maverick as the primary architects of Project Phoenix," Hayes explained. "Your husband's testimony is crucial, as is the evidence he collected. As for Lucas Maverick," she hesitated, "the evidence you provided showing he was deliberately kept in the dark is compelling, but our investigation continues." Could he still face charges? The possibility sent a chill through Sabine. Possibly, the Maverick corporate structure was deliberately designed to implicate him. Proving his innocence beyond reasonable doubt won't be easy. Sabine swallowed hard. And Dominic? What happens to him? Mr. Solana will need to remain available to testify, but he's not under investigation. Legally, your marriage is still valid. By the way, his death certificate will be invalidated. The news should have been a relief. Instead, it added another layer of complexity to an already impossible situation. When she returned to her hotel room that evening, Sabine found a message waiting for her, not from Dominic or Lucas, but from an unknown number. "They're coming. For Lucas tomorrow. Dawn raid. Charges filed. Leaked evidence wasn't enough to clear him. They need the Costa Rica servers. M. Michael Torres, Lucas's head of security. A man who had protected Sabine for 2 years, who knew more about Maverick Industries than perhaps anyone except Lucas himself." Sabine stared at the message, her heart racing. Was it a trap, a test of her loyalty, or a genuine warning from someone who believed in Lucas's innocence? She tried calling the number, but it was already disconnected. Without allowing herself to second-guess, she grabbed her purse and headed for the hospital. Lucas was being discharged tomorrow, directly into FBI custody, if Michael's warning was accurate. She found him sitting up in bed, arm in a sling, dark circles under his eyes, suggesting he'd been sleeping as poorly as she had. "Sabine," his surprise at seeing her was evident. "I thought—" "They're coming for you tomorrow," she interrupted, showing him the message. "Is it true? Could Michael know something like this?" Lucas paled as he read the text. "Yes," he said finally. "He has contacts in federal law enforcement." "Then, we need to get you out of here now." Lucas shook his head in disbelief. "You want to help me escape? After everything? After walking away?" "The USB evidence wasn't enough," Sabine explained. "Michael says they need the Costa Rica servers to fully exonerate you." "Those servers contain everything," Lucas confirmed quietly. "Every authorization, every false signature, every communication between my father and Vale." Sabine met his eyes. "Then that's where we need to go." For a moment, Lucas simply stared at her. Then, decision made, he swung his legs over the side of the bed. "There's an emergency stairwell at the end of the hall. It bypasses the main entrance where they might have people watching." 10 minutes later, they were in a taxi heading for Lucas's private airfield outside the city. He made quiet phone calls during the ride, his voice too low for Sabine to hear the conversations. "We need to tell Dominic," Sabine said suddenly. "He deserves to know where I've gone at least." Lucas handed her a burner phone. "One call, then we dump the phone. Security protocol." Sabine dialed Dominic's hospital room, relieved when he answered on the first ring. "It's me," she said softly. "I'm with Lucas. We're going to Costa Rica to retrieve the server evidence that will clear his name." A long pause. "The FBI will consider this fleeing prosecution." "It's not running away," she corrected. "It's running toward the truth. The evidence on the USB drive wasn't enough." "Sabine," Dominic's voice was gentle but firm, "be careful. If you're caught helping him leave the country, I know the risks, she interrupted, but I can't let an innocent man be framed, not after everything we've learned about how Gerald and Sebastian operated. Another pause. I understand. And, somehow, Sabine knew he truly did. Just come back safely, okay? Whatever happens, we'll figure it out. The simple promise nearly broke her. Thank you, she managed, before ending the call. Lucas was watching her, his expression unreadable in the dim cabin light. He's a good man, he said quietly. Better than my father. Probably better than me. This isn't a competition, Sabine replied, shaking her head. Isn't it? Lucas's voice was soft. 2 men, 1 woman, a choice to be made. Right now, the only choice is finding the truth, Sabine replied firmly. Everything else comes after. At the airfield, Lucas's personal pilot was waiting with the jet already fueled and flight plans filed. Where exactly are we going? Sabine asked as they boarded. A private research facility, about 50 miles from San Jose, Lucas explained. One of my father's pet projects that officially specialized in tropical medicine. In reality, it was the administrative hub for Phoenix. All the digital records are stored there. As the jet taxied for takeoff, Sabine realized with a jolt that she was now complicit in whatever came next. Aiding a potential fugitive, potentially obstructing justice. But the alternative, watching Lucas taken away in handcuffs, his name, forever linked to his father's crimes, was somehow worse. The flight was tense and largely silent. Sabine dozed fitfully while Lucas worked on his laptop, reviewing facility schematics and security protocols. We'll land at a private airstrip, he explained as they began their descent. Michael has arranged for a car and local security we can trust. The facility is officially shut down, but the servers are still operational. Everything we need will be there. And if it's not? Sabine asked quietly. Lucas's eyes met hers, uncertainty flashing briefly before his usual confidence returned. Then we face the music together. I won't let you take the fall for helping me, Sabine. If this doesn't work, I'll turn myself in and make it clear you were misled. I wasn't misled, she insisted. I'm here because I believe in you. Something vulnerable flickered across his face. Why? The question caught her off guard. What do you mean? Why do you believe in me? After everything that's happened, after learning what my family's company did to your husband, why risk everything to help me? Sabine considered the question, searching for the truth in her own heart. Because you're not your father, she said finally. You've spent your entire life trying to be different from him, to build something better. I've seen that in you from the beginning. She reached across the aisle, taking his hand. And because when it mattered most, when we were facing Sebastian, you put yourself between the knife and me without hesitation. That's who you really are, Lucas. Not the name on those corporate documents, or the heir to a tainted legacy. Just a man willing to sacrifice everything for what's right. His fingers tightened around hers, his eyes suspiciously bright in the dim cabin light. I don't deserve you. It's not about deserving, Sabine replied softly. It's about choosing, and right now, I'm choosing to believe in you. As the coastline of Costa Rica appeared below them, and the vast jungle stretched, out ahead Sabine wondered if she was flying toward answers, or simply more questions. Toward resolution or deeper complications, toward Lucas or away from Dominic, or perhaps most frightening of all, toward a truth that would force her to make the choice she'd been avoiding since the moment Dominic returned from the dead. Chapter 11. Truth and Reconciliation. The Costa Rican facility was exactly as Lucas had described it, a sprawling complex hidden in the dense jungle, its modern architecture incongruous against the primal landscape surrounding it. A sign at the entrance identified it as the Maverick Tropical Medicine Research Center, a convincing front for its true purpose. Security protocols are still active, Lucas noted as they approached the main gate, his rental car slowing. That means the systems are running, even if the staff is gone. How do we get in? Sabine asked. Lucas produced a keycard. Executive override. If my father built it, I can access it. The gates slid open silently, allowing them to drive through. The eerie emptiness of the place sent a chill down Sabine's spine. Abandoned medical equipment, hastily cleared desks, computer terminals still humming with power. They left in a hurry, Lucas murmured, leading her toward the main administrative section, probably right after I cut the official funding 6 months ago. But not all the funding, Sabine pointed out. Sebastian continued the project. Lucas's jaw tightened. Through channels I should have monitored more closely. The central server room was housed in a climate-controlled area at the heart of the facility. Lucas sat at the main terminal, his fingers flying over the keyboard. Despite his injured arm, my father's archives should still be intact, he explained. He documented everything, encrypted it with keys only he and I possessed. That's why Sebastian couldn't completely erase the evidence. He didn't have the highest-level access codes. Hours passed as Lucas dug through file after file, Sabine beside him, reviewing documents that painted an even more disturbing picture of Project Phoenix than they'd already seen. The scope was staggering. Dozens of subjects across multiple facilities, years of research, millions in funding. Here, Lucas said suddenly, his voice tight, this is what we need. Sabine leaned in to see an email thread between Gerald Maverick and Sebastian Vale, dated shortly before Gerald's death. Vale, your son is becoming problematic. His questions about resource allocation, his ethical concerns. About our methods, he's a liability. Maverick, Lucas will come around once he understands the potential. He's idealistic, but not stupid. Vale, and if he doesn't? If he tries to shut us down when he takes over? Maverick, then we continue without his knowledge. Compartmentalize, use the offshore entities, keep him focused on the public-facing projects while the real work continues. He never needs to know about Solana or the others. Vale, and if he finds out... Maverick, he won't. But if he does, the corporate structure ensures he bears legal responsibility while remaining functionally innocent. The perfect shield. Sabine felt sick. They deliberately set you up to take the fall. Not just that, Lucas said, opening another file. Look at the authorization protocols after my father died. The screen showed a log of digital signatures with a disturbing pattern emerging. Every Phoenix protocol after Gerald's death carried Lucas's digital signature, but the metadata revealed they were created using a separate authorization terminal that Lucas had never accessed. The location data placed that terminal in Sebastian's private office. Vale was digitally impersonating me, Lucas said grimly, creating a continuous trail of authorizations that seemed to come from me, but that I never saw or approved. Can you prove that? To the FBI? With this, I can. Lucas inserted a drive, beginning to download the evidence. It won't exonerate Maverick Industries completely. There will still be massive liability, but it proves I wasn't complicit. As the files transferred, Sabine wandered deeper into the facility, drawn to a hallway marked Subject Quarters. Each door had a number. Instead of a name, she found herself standing before the one labeled 47, Dominic's prison for 3 years. The room was Spartan, a hospital bed, monitoring equipment, a small bathroom. No windows, no personal effects, nothing to suggest a human being had lived here, suffered here, except for a single item tucked into a crack between the wall and bed frame. Sabine knelt, extracting a small, worn photograph. It was her, smiling at the camera, sunlight in her hair, the ocean behind her. Their honeymoon in Hawaii, a lifetime ago. Somehow, Dominic had kept this single connection to his former life. This one reminder of love and freedom, hidden from his captors. Tears blurred Sabine's vision. This wasn't just about corporate malfeasance or medical ethics. This was about a man who had endured unimaginable horror, clinging to the memory of his wife to survive, a man who still loved her enough to let her go even now. Sabine. Lucas appeared in the doorway, his expression softening when he saw her tears. "What is it?" She showed him the photograph, watching understanding dawn in his eyes. "He never gave up on you," Lucas said quietly, "even here, even through everything." "No," Sabine agreed, carefully tucking the photo into her pocket. "He didn't." Neither of them spoke as they made their way back through the facility, the weight of what they'd discovered and what it meant for all of them, settling like a physical presence between them. Outside, the tropical night had fallen, stars blazing in the velvet sky. Lucas paused at the car, turning to face Sabine. "I have what I need to clear my name," he said softly, "but that doesn't change the fact that my father's company, my company, did this to Dominic, to others." "It wasn't your fault," Sabine insisted. "No," Lucas agreed, "but it is my responsibility." He took a deep breath. "And so is what happens next." "What do you mean?" Lucas's eyes were resolute. "I'm going back to face the investigation. To make this right, all of it. The victims deserve justice, compensation, acknowledgement of what was done to them." Sabine searched his face. "You could still be charged. The evidence might not be enough." "It's a risk I have to take," he replied. "Running might save me temporarily, but it would only confirm my guilt in everyone's eyes, including my own." He took her hands in his. "We came here for the truth, and now we have it. My father and Sebastian Vale created Phoenix. They used my company, my name, and my resources to do terrible things. Whatever legal consequences I face, I need to face them openly." "And do we?" Sabine corrected quietly. "We face them." Lucas shook his head. "No, I won't let you sacrifice any more for me." He hesitated, pain flashing across his features. "Especially when I know your heart is torn." Sabine started to protest, but Lucas continued. "I've seen how you look at that photograph, Sabine. I've heard how your voice changes when you speak to him. You still love him. You probably never stopped." "I love you too," she whispered, tears threatening again. "I know," he said, his smile sad but genuine. "And that's the hardest part, isn't it? Loving two people at once." He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch unbearably tender. "When we get back, when this is all settled, you're going to have to choose, and whatever you decide, whoever you choose, I want you to know that loving you has been the greatest gift of my life." Before she could respond, a sound caught their attention. Car engines, approaching fast. Headlights appeared on the access road leading to the facility. "Security. Team police?" Sabine asked, tension coiling in her stomach. Lucas shook his head, expression grim. "Neither. The local authorities wouldn't know about this place, and my security team is waiting at the airstrip." He pulled her toward their car. "Someone else is coming. Someone who knew we'd be here." They drove away from the main entrance, taking a service road that wound through the dense jungle surrounding the facility. Behind them, the headlights divided, vehicles positioning themselves to block potential escape routes. "How did they find us?" Sabine asked, gripping the dashboard as Lucas navigated the rough terrain. "I don't know," Lucas replied, his focus on the treacherous road. "Michael arranged everything through secure channels, unless—" He didn't finish the thought, but he didn't need to. unless Michael had betrayed them, unless this had been a trap all along. The service road eventually connected with a paved highway, and Lucas pressed the accelerator, putting distance between them and their pursuers. As the lights of San Jose appeared on the horizon, Sabine's phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unknown number. "Don't answer it," Lucas warned. Sabine stared at the screen. It might be Dominic. Against Lucas's advice, she accepted the call, putting it on speaker. "Sabine!" It was indeed Dominic's voice, tense with urgency. "Where are you?" "On the road to San Jose," she replied. "Someone found us at the facility. We had to run." "It's Hayes," Dominic said, without preamble. "She's been working with Vale all along. That's why the FBI investigation kept hitting dead ends. That's why previous investigations were buried." Lucas cursed under his breath. "That explains how they found us." "She's in Costa Rica?" Sabine asked, her blood running cold. "With a team," Dominic confirmed. "Michael Torres discovered her connection to Vale just hours after you left. He sent me coordinates for an alternate extraction point. I'm texting them now." The phone pinged with an incoming message showing a location about 30 miles northeast of their current position. "Can we trust him?" Lucas asked. "Michael could be compromised too." "He sent me copies of Hayes's communications with Vale going back 3 years, Dominic replied. "It's genuine. She's been his inside person at the FBI, helping him continue Phoenix while deflecting investigations." Lucas made a sharp turn, heading northeast. "How did you find this out?" A pause. "I've been conducting my own investigation since escaping, building a network of contacts, following money trails. It's what I was doing before Vale captured me at your old house." "Why didn't you tell us?" Sabine asked. "I wasn't sure who to trust," Dominic admitted. "Not until I saw Lucas fight Vale to protect you. Not until I realized he truly didn't know what his father had built." The simple statement hung in the air between them, an acknowledgement that despite everything, the two men had reached a mutual understanding. "The extraction point is a private airstrip operated by a conservation organization," Dominic continued. "Michael has a plane waiting. It will take you directly to Washington, D.C., where a contact at the Justice Department is expecting the server evidence." "You've thought of everything," Lucas said, a note of respect in his voice. "I've had months to plan this," Dominic replied, "ever since I discovered Hayes was corrupt." Sabine felt a chill run down her spine. "Dominic, where are you now?" Another pause, longer this time. "Still in San Francisco, but don't worry about me. Just get that evidence to Washington. It's the only way to end this for good." Something in his tone set off alarm bells. "What aren't you telling us?" "Hayes sent a team to the hospital after you left," Dominic said finally. "I managed to get away, but they're looking for me, for all of us." "You need to come with us," Sabine insisted. "We'll send another plane." "There's no time," Dominic replied gently. "And this way, one of us remains free if something happens to your flight." The logic was sound, but Sabine couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't telling her everything. "Promise me you'll stay safe." "I promise to end this," he said instead, "one way or another." The call ended, leaving Sabine and Lucas in troubled silence as they continued toward the extraction point. The stars overhead seemed colder now, the tropical night less beautiful and more threatening. "He's planning something," Lucas said finally, voicing what they both suspected. Sabine nodded, fear clutching at her heart. "Something dangerous. Something he doesn't expect to survive," Lucas added quietly. As they drove through the darkness, the weight of Dominic's sacrifice, whatever it might be, hung heavily between them. They had the evidence to clear Lucas's name, to expose Hayes and the remnants of Phoenix. But at what cost? And how many more lives would be shattered before this was truly over? Chapter 12. Where Love Remains. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters, cameras flashing like lightning as Lucas emerged into the sunlight. The 3-week trial had ended with a conclusive verdict. Lucas fully cleared of involvement in Project Phoenix, while Maverick Industries was held liable for the actions taken under Gerald Maverick's direction. "Mr. Maverick, how does it feel to be exonerated? Will you maintain control of Maverick Industries? What about Agent Hayes? Will she face prosecution? What about the victims? Will they receive compensation?" Lucas held up a hand, silencing the barrage of questions. "Maverick Industries will establish a substantial fund for all those affected by Project Phoenix. While I have been cleared of personal involvement, I acknowledge the profound moral failure that occurred under my family's company. The victims deserve not just compensation, but justice, healing, and the assurance that nothing like this can ever happen again." He paused, his expression solemn. "As for Agent Hayes, her case is proceeding through the justice system. Her collaboration with Sebastian Vale allowed these atrocities to continue far longer than they should have." Left unspoken was the night. Hayes had been arrested. The night Dominic Solana had risked everything to gather the final evidence against her, nearly losing his life in the process. The night he'd proven beyond any doubt that he was willing to sacrifice himself to bring the entire Phoenix conspiracy down. Sabine watched from a distance, her heart swelling with a complicated mixture of pride and anticipation. Lucas had been true to his word, returning voluntarily to face the investigation, providing evidence that exposed his father's crimes while establishing his own innocence, pledging vast resources to make amends. He had faced the ugliest legacy of his father with courage and integrity. But he had also given Sabine space, not pressuring her during the trial, respecting her need to sort through her feelings. His only message had been a simple note: "Whatever you decide, know that loving you has been the greatest gift of my life." Now, as the crowd of reporters finally dispersed, Lucas stood alone on the courthouse steps, scanning the plaza until his eyes found hers. He didn't approach, simply waiting to see what she would do. "Are you going to him?" Sabine turned to find Dominic beside her, the scar on his cheek from that final confrontation with Hayes still visible, a permanent reminder of how close they'd come to losing everything. "I don't know," she admitted, though the words felt hollow even to her own ears. Dominic nodded, his gaze following hers to Lucas. "He's a better man than his father." "Yes," Sabine agreed softly, "he is." They stood in silence for a moment, these two men who had each claimed a piece of her heart, now watching each other across a crowded plaza with something like wary respect. "And kept our appointment, you know," Dominic said suddenly. Sabine looked at him questioningly. "At the fertility clinic, the day of the accident." He smiled sadly. "We were going to start trying for a baby that month. I had it all planned out. What I'd say to you that night, how we'd celebrate this new chapter." The revelation hit Sabine like a physical blow. They had talked about children, dreamed of them, but she'd had no idea Dominic had taken that concrete step, that they had been so close to creating the family they'd always wanted. "I didn't know," she whispered. "How could you?" Dominic shrugged. "It was going to be a surprise." He paused, his eyes never leaving her face. "I still want that, Sabine. A family, a future, with you." Sabine felt tears spring to her eyes. "Dominic," he continued gently, "only if it's what you want, too. Only if your heart is truly with me." He took her hands in his touch achingly familiar. "These past months, watching you with him, seeing how you look at him, I realized something. You loved me completely once. But that was another lifetime." "I still love you," Sabine insisted, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I know," Dominic smiled, brushing away a tear with his thumb. "And I will always love you. But love changes, Sabine. It grows, it evolves, it finds new forms." He glanced toward Lucas, who still waited patiently at the bottom of the courthouse steps. "The man you fell in love with while I was gone? He's a good man. He fought for you. He nearly died protecting both of us. He gave up everything to expose the truth, even knowing he might lose you in the process." "So did you," Sabine pointed out. "Yes," Dominic agreed. "But the difference is I'm holding on to what we had, what we lost." His voice softened. "And Lucas is offering you what you've become." Sabine stared at him. This man who had been her first true love, who had suffered unimaginable horrors and still found the strength to set her free. "What about you?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Don't you deserve happiness too?" Dominic's smile was gentle. "I'll find my way. I always do." He leaned forward, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. "Be happy, Sabine. That's all I've ever wanted for you." With that, he stepped back, giving her one last look filled with love and understanding. Then he turned and walked away, his silhouette gradually disappearing into the crowd. Sabine stood frozen, tears streaming down her face, her heart simultaneously breaking and healing in ways she hadn't thought possible. When she finally turned back toward the courthouse steps, Lucas was still there, watching her with patient eyes that held question and hope in equal measure. Slowly, one step at a time, Sabine moved toward him. Toward the man who had pieced her back together when grief had shattered her, who had fought to protect her when danger threatened, who had been willing to lose her rather than compromise the truth. "Hi," she said simply when she reached him. "Hi," he replied, his voice tender. "Are you okay?" Sabine considered the question. Was she okay? After everything that had happened, all the revelations and pain and impossible choices. "I'm getting there," she answered honestly. "One day at a time." Lucas nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Can I walk with you?" For a while, Sabine looked up at him. This man who had become her present when her past was just a memory. This man who now offered a future, asking nothing, except the chance to remain by her side. "Yes," she said, slipping her hand into his. "I'd like that." As they walked away from the courthouse together, Sabine felt something settle inside her. The past would always be a part of her. Dominic would always hold a piece of her heart, but the road ahead belonged to her and Lucas, a road they would travel together step by step, rebuilding what had been broken, creating something new from the ashes of what had been lost. It wouldn't be easy. There would be healing needed, trust to rebuild, a company to transform, a life to reinvent. But as Lucas squeezed her hand gently, his blue eyes warm with love and promise, Sabine knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was where her heart belonged. This was where love remains, the end.